On our Sunday special report, tens of thousands of people were victims of human rights injustices during the several decades of Taiwan's White Terror. Some of the sites of those injustices have been preserved. One example, the Jingmei Military Detention Center in New Taipei, now forms part of Taiwan's National Human Rights Museum. However, legal complications have prevented dozens of other sites from receiving similar recognition and protection. One victim of political persecution, Jing-Mei, says that preserving these sites is important so that society can learn from its past mistakes. Let's hear from Qing and others who share his perspective on historical preservation.
军事法庭，它的造物原来的完全一样样。我每次进到这个场所，我都会有一种心情上的非常的不舒服。
Walking into the old military court at the Jing-Mei White Terror Memorial Park in New Taipei, Jing-Mei recalls 40 years ago when he was on trial there, a memory that still haunts him.
所以那天我站在这个地方，非常战战兢兢的，非常恐慌。
That day I was standing here and I was trembling and panicked. Finally, the judge spoke, and he said that I was young and ignorant. He said I came to this land and did something that was disappointing to the ROC, but that my actions did not warrant the death penalty. Instead, the court decided to sentence me to 12 years imprisonment.
Only 20 years old at the time, Chen had come to Taiwan from Malaysia to study at National Cheng University. As Chen frequently visited the U.S. Information Service Tainan building to read books in its collection, he became the prime suspect when the building was bombed in 1971 and was brought to Taipei for interrogation. Writer Li Ao and independence activist Xie Zongmin came forward 10 days later and claimed responsibility for the bombing, but Chen was not given back his freedom.
我说为什么会这个样子？这很简单，你是侨生，你在台湾也没人。
I asked why that was the case, and they said it was simple. It was because I was a student from overseas. They said nobody in Taiwan knew who I was, and even though they had no case, they could find some other reason for locking me up. They said they weren't planning to let me go, and if they decided to throw me into the sea or to throw me in jail and shoot me, nobody would care about it. Whatever they did with me, they would still get their reward.
From the 1950s to the 1980s, the White Terror was a period of nearly 4 decades of political repression. During that period, more than 16,000 innocent people like Chen were forced to whittle away their youth behind bars.
这个就是我曾经被关押过的房间。
I was once locked up in this room. Across from this wall was Zhuangjing High School. When I was locked up in there, the thing I found most difficult was that I could hear the school principal making his morning announcements every day. I would think to myself, I'm just one person and I haven't done anything wrong. Why am I in here, crouched down in this prison cell?
The Transitional Justice Commission has classified sites like this, where large-scale violations of human rights were committed, as historical sites of injustice.
早期重视人，再来重视档案，再来空间的历史逐渐浮现。
In the early stage, we focused on the victims and then on the archives. After that, spaces begin to emerge. So we equate this historical sites of injustice with a comprehensive understanding of the history of authoritarian rule. These sites are very important, indispensable elements of our work.
Historical sites of injustice are spaces imbued with history, and they are the last piece of the puzzle for people to understand what happened during the White Terror era. However, it wasn't until 2017 that these spaces were finally recognized under the Act on Promoting Transitional Justice, finally allowing work to begin on preservation and reconstruction.
台湾距离22870几年，白色恐怖50、60年。
It's been more than 70 years since the 228 incident, and at least 50 or 60 years since the White Terror era. From what we know, the majority of historical sites of injustice, more than half of them lack any structural remains. Some have only part of their structure remaining. Very, very few of these sites have fully intact buildings.
The Transitional Justice Commission was established in May 2018, and in 4 years it identified 107 historical sites of injustice, 42 of which have been publicly announced. The remaining 65 were handed over to the Ministry of Culture to handle in May 2022. However, preserving these historical sites has not proven easy.
好，我们现在大家看到的这个
Over here, you can see this well-known 5-star hotel. Decades ago, in the 1950s, that was the site of the detention center used by the notorious Taiwan Garrison Command.
In Taipei Ximending shopping area, there are also hidden ruins of detention centers used by the Taiwan Garrison Command. In the 1950s, secret executions of detainees were often heard here.
从这个戏院的大楼这边还有餐厅哦，到
From this theater building and this restaurant to this famous bookstore next door and this mixed residential and commercial building. This whole block spanning more than 2,000 ping was a historical site of injustice during the martial law era.
Despite this bloody history, traces of these injustices have all but disappeared at many of the sites.
说这一段历史本来就已经是社会共同的禁忌嘛。
This period of history was once a taboo subject in Taiwanese society, and in the early period following the end of martial law, there was no concept of preserving historical sites and cultural assets. After the military moved out, the sites were quickly auctioned off to the private sector. Memories of this period of history, originally part of the collective memory of the public, are now fragmented and broken. How do you take these sites, which are now occupied by shopping centers and hotels, and restore them? Having those sites once again enter the public consciousness and become part of our history, that's a very difficult process.
Preservation work at sites that retain their original appearance is also often difficult due to legal obstacles.
针对这个政治犯来讲，他们不知道这个空间关系，对他就会以为他是住在地下室，所以在心理上就产生一个更封闭的。
The former Ankang Guest House Detention Center opened in January 1974 and had been used to interrogate political prisoners from the Kaohsiung incident of 1979. After martial law was lifted, the site was used as a storage facility for the Investigation Bureau, but was left half abandoned. The site was classified a historical site of injustice in 2022, but officials have not been able to proceed with preservation work.
它被外面的所谓的不管叫做网红就是这种不断的入侵。
Online content creators go into the abandoned Ankang site all the time. There are at least a dozen times that we know of. They also destroy things when they're in there. Nevertheless, the new Taipei government refuses to grant temporary historical site recognition. Under these circumstances, the site will just keep getting destroyed.
The Ankang site circumstances are a result of current laws. Although the Act on Promoting Transitional Justice stipulates that historic sites of injustice should be preserved and restored, it doesn't specify steps for implementing that. Therefore, officials currently still rely on the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act to seek protection for these sites as cultural assets. However, sites used in the past as prisons often do not meet the standards of cultural assets review committees to be considered cultural assets.
从建筑物来讲，其实它有民国60几年才盖好的。
From a structural point of view, since the Ankang site wasn't finished until the 1970s, it's still not that old. It's also not a particularly beautiful building. It was built to detain political prisoners, so they just threw it together. So there's really nothing there in terms of cultural assets, building materials, or architectural style or vocabulary that is worth preserving.
Another challenge is that the review committee is designated by the local government. Therefore, when historical sites are located in development zones, preservation concerns will conflict with economic concerns. In such cases, committees are even less likely to grant these sites preservation status.
我们像我们这群人非常感谢，当时候把
People like myself, we are grateful for those who held on to this land back then. That's a big help to us, as it gives us the opportunity to stand here and tell others what happened to us in the past.
The National Human Rights Museum opened in 2018, and from that year to 2021, the museum's Jing-Mei location received more than 420,000 visitors. In August 2022, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the museum's Jing-Mei branch, and Chin served as her personal guide.
I was arrested
in 1971, so if you come over here to the nameplates for 1971, you can find my name. I was in prison for 12 years, from 1971 to 1983.
The road toward transitional justice is a long one. Now, 40 years after his release from prison, Chin has finally received his diploma from National Cheng-Kung University. He is still unsure who should be held responsible for his wrongful arrest. For now, all he can do is to keep visiting Jing-Mei and telling his story.
I do
this not to express my emotions, but because I hope that my story will help people better understand these things. I hope my story can extend to the stories of other victims, and that all those stories linked together can become a lesson for society. These sites are places to witness this negative past, so we can't let them be destroyed so easily.
Over 7,000 names are listed on the monument at the National Human Rights Museum. Not all of those victims found justice, but as long as historical sites of injustice are preserved, the stories can continue to be told.